Innovation, imagination, wonder. These are just some of the words used to describe Dr. Harvey Passes. Dr. Passes explores interesting people and ideas that will stimulate you. He questions the people who develop, create, and employ novel concepts in business and everyday lives. He especially loves to speak with successful people. How did they do it? How can you do it too? So let's join Dr. Harvey Passes in his quest of wonder and curiosity as we watch Dr. Harvey Passes Presents.
Today I have asked one of my close friends and an individual whose opinion I respect dearly. This gentleman is frankly one of my mentors, and I've had him on the show years past many times, so I will have to say he's no stranger to you. And indeed, many people who have corporations around the country and indeed around the world know of this man. He's been around to help fix countries and companies when they get sick. This man is just amazing. He is involved in an institute, and this institute is involved in something right now which you have got to listen to. Because of the world situation, what he has to talk about is going to be very important in a way to help us get through what we're involved in right now, and with the financial markets, and what can be done in the future for it. He's going to tell like it is. He's not going to put a Band-Aid on anything. This gentleman is Mr. Hank Boerner, and I'll give you the name of the organization that he's with in 1 minute. Hank?
Hey.
Pleasure to have you back on the show again.
Good to be back here.
It's great to have you here. The name of your institute is the Governance and Accountability Institute, correct?
Correct.
It's a mouthful.
Accountability.
Accountability, okay.
Personal and collective or institutional.
Okay.
Right.
Before we get beyond where I want the show to go, let's first go back. You have a feeling, and the feeling is that the disgusting mess that the United States and the world, but the United States is in, it really comes down to how people behave, how they conduct themselves on an individual level, and how peoples get together to
right.
form an entity, be it a company, be it an organization of some kind, and how that organization behaves and how they show ethics and morality. Is this correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Got it.
Okay.
Right.
And that's the end of the show. Thank you very much. Say
good
hi to
see you
Mary
again.
Ann.
Yes,
Goodbye.
thank you.
Okay. All right. So now it starts at the bottom, and you have to be accountable for yourself. Now, you have a term, letters, ESG equals sustainability.
Correct.
What does E mean? What does S mean? What does G mean? And then explain what sustainability means.
Okay. We know what the lack of sustainability means, and we can look at the Wall Street firms and the banks that are no longer with us. Not so long ago, we had 5 well-known investment banks. Major banks, worldwide.
Major.
3 of them are gone. Gone. Poof. And 2 of them are changing shape somewhat, becoming more like commercial banks and regulated in the way commercial banks are, and less of the way investment banks on Wall Street were regulated. The lack of sustainability is really a frightening thing, because you think about 2 large government enterprises, sponsored enterprises, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which have majority of homes in America in some way are financed through these 2, and they both had to be taken over by the government after years, 30 years, 40 years in one case of independent operation. They couldn't be trusted. Their books couldn't be trusted. So
Stop.
the lack
Hold
of
it.
sustainability.
You said the most important word. I want to throw these words out as the show is going on. The key word here is trust. Trust.
Right.
Okay. Keep going on.
Okay.
We're going to come back to all this.
So, you know, in a free enterprise, and we like to believe that America is a free enterprise and democratic society, trust is very important, because if you can't trust the person who is, well, let's say, looking over your food supply or your water supply,
your money supply,
or the medicine or your money supply or your savings account or your pension, If you can't trust the people in charge
To do the right thing.
to do the right thing for the right reasons, then who can you trust? And that trust has broken down. It's not only broken down and affecting every American today who's watching this program, but it's affecting the rest, or infecting, I should say. It's an infectious disease, the rest of the world, because a lot of the junk bonds that we put together with subprime or substandard mortgages were peddled to the central banks of Europe, who trusted the United States of America.
Trust.
There was a certain trust attached to that. And we see this played out in other areas, trying to stay with the financial, but think about the war in the Middle East and about weapons of mass destruction and so forth. So there's a chain of accountability that starts with us as individuals and goes all the way to the top with the leaders. That chain has snapped. Snaps in many places. We used to say the weak link in the chain would snap. That whole chain is shattered. And some of us are trying to be accountable, and a lot of us are talking about how can we make our country accountable? How can we make our leaders accountable? And I think that the thing you have to remember is that there's always greed and fear as motivations.
Mm-hmm.
So the human condition is to be greedy and to be self-interested, as Adam Smith said about capitalism, that self-interest drives it, and that's good. It drives innovation, it drives invention, it drives all the good
Right.
things. But if greed if greed can overcome the fear of what might happen when you do the wrong thing, then greed gallops away, and that's what happened in this marketplace. That's the simplest explanation of what happened.
Okay, so we're taking it down now into trust, accountability, and greed.
And greed.
And
right.
greed. And greed remained unchecked.
True.
Greed was unchecked. Now, what do you mean by sustainability?
All right. Well, when you invest in a company, or when you go to work for a company, or if you do business with a company, or you sign a contract to become a major supplier to the company, or you buy shares in the company, in the business, in the corporation, there's a trust factor. I mean, you're trusting that they're going to be there tomorrow and the day after. If you show up at work that afternoon, you're not going to be escorted out by security with the box with everything that's on your desk, as happened with banks and major finance companies. So they're going to be there. So sustainability is about believing that these enterprises have the right stuff, if you want to say that. They have the right leadership. Leadership has the right character and the right values, because at the top you're building the culture. It's also bottom up, but you're building a certain culture. And some people on Wall Street, some of the analysts say that their valuation of a share, if they look at what's a company worth, that 1/3 or maybe as much as 40% of what they think it is worth, and therefore is a sustainable investment, that 1/3 may be the character of management and the culture that they've built or haven't built. And so the laggards, we're beginning to see a separation, even in the midst of all this turmoil. There's still money sloshing around the system and still investments being made. And we're seeing the leaders emerge because they're of character and sustainable. And we're seeing the laggards and the losers being more clearly identified. Kind of a scary thing if you work for one of the laggards or losers. Kind of a good thing if and you know you're doing the right thing if you're working for one of the leaders in the marketplace.
Well,
and there are leaders.
But the laggards, the laggards have exhibited greed. They have destroyed trust, and they have absolutely shunned any accountability. You see this. We were just talking earlier about some of these people who were in front of the congressional investigations.
Yes.
And yet
they were doing this.
I did not mean they did it. Right. And these people yet were given millions of dollars in their severance. Their parent.
Yes. You see, that's contract. They have the board of director liability or culpability, and maybe criminal liability. Was the board really an oversight board? Or were they sitting there like, you remember the little doll on the back of the, as you drove the Yankees or the Mets were going up there?
Right.
That's what some boards, I'm not going to condemn all boards,
right.
but some boards were like that. So they said, well, it's really a seller's market. If this is what this CEO needs or wants, or compared to what others are getting, it's a small circle of candidates, then we got to take care of them. So there you see in the distortion of the system, a manager at a very large industrial company being passed over, and there were 3 or 4 candidates internally, being passed over for the chairmanship, CEO and chairmanship. And I'm not going to name companies if I can help it.
You don't have to.
Unless they're really bad. So he leaves. He's recruited by one of the major retailers in America. And so he goes there and he begins to apply his methodology and his industrial mentality, if you will, and methodologies, and it doesn't work. And there's revolt, and customers are leaving, and employees are unhappy. So the board decides he has to go, and they escort him out. However, in his employment contract, a little bit earlier, 1 year earlier, he said, look, I've been with this big company for a long time, and they owe me this, so you have to make me whole if anything happens. And he leaves with a wheelbarrow full of $250 million cash, as the next guy has to rebuild that company.
Clean up all the garbage.
It's an employment contract. Okay, and that's what's happening on Wall Street with the investment bankers. So you're reading about people leaving with millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions. It's because the board, and some boards don't even know what's in the package. It is so complex. And they have compensation experts and attorneys and advisors and coaches, and they put all this together. Now you think about this. Your son comes home from school and says, Dad, you know what? My teacher said I'm in the 3rd quartile. What is that? Well, 2nd quartile. And Dad says, wait a minute. You're smarter than that. I know the kids in your class. You should be in the 1st quartile. Yeah, everybody should be in the 1st quartile when you're talking about CEO compensation. So when they do the charts and they do the comparisons, and you're in the 2nd quartile, like that kid in 2nd grade or 3rd grade, so wait a minute. Our guy's better than those turkeys. He should be in the 1st quartile. Move him up. So we should have a chart with only 1 quartile. I don't know what we call it. A 1? I don't know. Right. But so there's this competition among CEOs to get more and more and more. They look at each other, and there's sort of an insidious circle. There are compensation experts who come in and say, we know how to make your guy better incentivized. And now that's really the heart of the problem if you think about it. Incentives. Think back to greed. Call it self-interest. Each of us have a self-interest that we would like to advance and take care of our families and so on. And so what the incentives are built into the system really will determine what's going to happen down here. So if the incentive is to get the share price up in 1 year, what do you think that guy's going to be focused on?
Right.
And if you're a banker and you've always been looking at risk and suddenly they're telling you, hey, look what the other banks are doing, we better get our numbers up, risk is going to go whoop off the table, and we're now going to chase the numbers, and that's what happened.
So the big problem that we have right now, the end result, is that many companies can't function today because the credit has dried up. And it's dried up, and it goes backwards. It's dried up all because of trust and unaccountability.
The banks won't even lend to each other.
Correct.
Because they don't trust banks. They don't trust the other banks.
This is the whole point of our conversation, is that it comes back to people saying, I like to say it, BLT equals R, not bacon, lettuce, and tomato. You got to believe the person, you got to like them, you got to trust them, equals respect.
Right.
And if you can't have that, then everything stops.
Well, we've been drilled in business for the last 30 years, perhaps a little more. What's been drilled in is not about likability. Sometimes it's not even about trust. It's about getting over on the other guy one shot, or not quite, we call it prevarication, not quite telling a lie and not quite telling the truth, and it's sort of shading it. And, it's up to buyer beware, caveat emptor. Let the buyer of the stock try to figure it out. Here's the efficient market theory. The stock is priced fairly. You buy it, I buy it. You sell it, I buy it. Everything we need to know about that is built into the price of the stock. So all of the information about that, and we buy it, and we buy it on trust. But what happens if that information has been falsified? Or, finagled, and they'll say, well, I didn't break the law, or we didn't break any laws, or it was the best information we had at the moment because we didn't ask the other questions. So what was out there was, I did my best. You hear a lot of this. Or everyone was doing it. So the accounting rules, So part of the incentives or the accounting rules, which encourage risky behavior in many cases, And, in Europe and London, United Kingdom, they have what's called principle-based accounting. And to reduce it to its real simplicity, it says, everything you need to know about this, I have fairly, on principles, let you know this. So it's not about Rule 182 or 157 or 133. We don't game the rules, which the book is that thick now. I'm presenting to you that this is a good thing, and you can trust me. So we don't have too much of that in this country because we're looking at rules. We're more rules-based. Now, this may change over the next 2 or 3 years. Why? Because an army of foreign investors are coming to the United States. One of our major banks just got the second infusion from offshore of oil money to keep it propped up, to keep the balance sheet clean. And you're seeing lots of foreign investors. Some of them are sovereign wealth funds. What that is a government-sponsored entity, maybe Dubai or Abu Dhabi or Qatar or China has one, India's starting one up. It's all the surplus money that we've been sending them. So they come, and we're cheap now, so they come and they buy U.S. stock. Now, there's some, if it's a bank, there's some regulation, and if they're going to get control of a company and it's a sensitive company like Dubai Ports, there's a little bit of oversight.
Right.
But by and large, they can buy almost anything they want.
That's
here.
correct.
All right, so we're going to see many more foreigners coming here because we're so cheap and their currencies are strong, or they have a lot of dollars, and they have a different mentality. They don't pay their CEOs the way they don't have the incentive systems like we do. They're more social-minded, common-minded. And so we're going to see a change. It's already happening, a subtle change in the investment styles, and I think the behavior of U.S. companies as their behavior is shaped more by the people who own them. They're called share owners. And so that's happening.
Let's shift our discussion. It's the same foundation of talk, but it's a little different area, but it's just amazing how everything comes back to the same thing. Let's talk about climate change.
Okay. Is it happening or not?
That's, okay.
Okay. Is it man-made or not?
Natural, right.
Will it make a difference or not? And that's the debate. And, of course, if you have, remember, self-interest and incentive. So if you have certain self-interest and you're incentivized, maybe you're an oil company.
Maybe you own coal.
Or you own,
You own all the coal reserves,
coal,
and you want to use that as new fuel. And
over here,
what is it going to do to the climate?
And over here we have, all the way on the extreme, the Birkenstock crowd. Nothing wrong with Birkenstocks. But that, you know what I mean, the Greens saying, wait a minute, everything that we see, this Hurricane Ike came through, that's climate change. In fact, the consensus is, and it's a very broad and deep consensus, among scientists is that it's occurring. And that there is a tipping point that we will reach, and that if we don't address industrial and other pollution, that we're going to go past this. And if you live in Montana, you will have waterfront property. You don't have to move to Florida anymore.
Right.
Okay. Of course, it'll be a lot warmer. But on the other side, there are arguments that say, and some of them are rational, wait a minute, why should I do this? Or if you're running a utility company. Or if I do make the changes, they're going to be so infinitesimal compared to the whole that it really won't make any difference. Why should I lose my job? Why should my shareholders lose money? Why should I have to lay off people if I have to increase my expenses to address climate change? In fact, it goes back to accountability. Each of us is accountable as stewards of the earth, as shepherds of this earth, no matter what our philosophy, our religion, our creed. We are shepherds of this earth, and we ought to do everything we can to protect our children and grandchildren. So climate change is happening. The root causes are still being debated, but it's pretty clear. And there's some dire results ahead and very strong economic results ahead if we don't do something. And we're almost at the tipping point.
Well, that was my question. What could happen to America if we don't do anything?
Well, just think about the cost of energy today. We import something like 70% of our fossil fuels, not coal, but gas. And, gas comes from many of the same places that oil does. It's the flare-off.
Right.
So we're looking at some dictatorships and unstable countries, and we're fighting a war in the Middle East, and that's an oil region. The 3 biggest countries producing are over there. And so what happens if it's 200 a barrel or 300 a barrel or 400 a barrel if we have really severe cold winters and very hot summers? What happens if we have 3 or 4 more New Orleans or Galveston Islands?
Oh, God.
Okay, what happens if we have droughts in the Midwest? These and
We do.
Waterfront properties could be underwater. Severe hurricanes can rip through Long Island, the 100-year storm, which would do tremendous damage. So those are just sort of the cataclysmic events. There's just a steady whittling away of our economy because we're not addressing social change as though it is an imperative like the war on terror, because it really is.
I think the problem is that everything we're discussing it's like discussing the football game, the morning after the game is finished, because then I'm saying,
Replay.
He should have done this, he should have done that, he should have done this. People are not interested in this kind of a conversation before the storm. It's like, make sure you're prepared. Make sure you've got this. Make sure, the storm, come on. Hurricane season's over. Water. It goes on and on and on.
Right.
The discussion we're having now is very relevant because as we speak, the stock market was going down. And all these problems are going on, and people are saying, well, what happened?
Well, it goes back to the beginning. It wasn't sustainable.
But nobody cared about it.
Well, now they do.
Well, that's my point.
All
now
right,
they
so let
care
me give
about
you a new formula.
Because the horse is now out of the corral. Now, hey, we should close the corral.
Okay, let's close it because horses reproduce.
Right.
There'll be more horses, and what goes with it.
Well, no, we've got to do this. But I'm just saying, my opinion is that the average person doesn't give a darn about this.
I disagree a little bit because
I hope you're right and I'm wrong.
Look at the arguments about the elections, about whether it's presidential or Congress or local. There's lots of discussion. There's also lots of ordinary people watching this show tonight saying, what can I do about this? What can I do?
Okay. Go ahead. What can answer it?
There's a new framework for looking at companies and whether they're sustainable or not, whether people are accountable or not, if they have the right cultures, the right values, and the right behaviors, including climate change. It's called ESG. That's now the common term. And it means environmental and energy, that's the E, social issues, concerns, and G for governance. Now, a lot of these issues have existed for years in the different buckets. They're in the E bucket, you have environmentalists. They're in the S bucket, and you might have social advocates or philanthropies or NGOs looking at it and government looking at it. And then G, which is sort of the province of lawyers and corporate secretaries saying, what about board elections? What about CEO pay? They've all come together. They've come together primarily in Europe, again, more socialistic and common good oriented. And so there are buckets, and climate change is one of them in this E bucket. And there's do we do business with despots and dictators? That's sort of in the social bucket. It's a little bit in the energy bucket, too. That's why it's ESG.
That's right.
And governance. How are these turkeys running this, whatever it is that they're in charge of governing? And are they looking back at social issues and looking back at environmental issues? Now, I'm happy to say that in America, more and more companies, and you hear the term corporate social responsibility or social responsibility, more companies are stepping up and embracing green. Everything is green. You pick up the newspaper and you see green ads. But what the Europeans are saying is let's look at pollution, let's look at the cost of pollution to society and factor that into the company. Do we want to invest in that company or not? Okay. They look at social issues like diversity, child labor or slave labor around the world, slave labor in the Middle East. Walmart retailer, which has been under fire recently, said, okay, you're right, to the critics. We're not going to buy certain cottons from countries in the East because of child labor involved. Right. Doesn't matter that we're giving you a good price and quality. We're not going to buy cotton from those countries that use child labor.
Right.
Okay, so that's a social response, a social responsibility. So this ESG, or environmental, social, and governance framework, really equals at the end what companies are going to be sustainable or not. And so we hear discussions about, well, will the automotive companies in America survive? They mean U.S. companies like our big three.
Right.
Well, there's another side to that, and that is green auto companies are here, Japanese, and they're building cars, the hybrids and so on, that are waiting lists, and they are socially responsible in that regard. They are addressing climate change. And they're attracting buyers. They're also attracting investors. Mm-hmm. And so one of them moved forward to become the number one automobile company in the world in terms of sales, while Detroit keeps sliding back. Now,
there you go.
Okay. So there's a question of sustainability. Which company would you bet your pension fund on? Mm-hmm. So Americans are investors. We have 401ks. We've got IRAs. We've got stock accounts. We've got mutual funds. Majority of Americans, 125 million or so adults, are invested in some way in the stock market, in these companies. And those that are not have a stake in it, as we're seeing in this market debacle, because the company's not sustainable, they start laying people off.
That's right.
People laid off, they don't buy in the store. They don't buy in the store store closes, more people are laid off. New stores are not going to be built, new merchandise not ordered, et cetera, and that's what we call the vicious circle. Just keeps going. It's a downward spiral. The Great Depression resulted from a really severe recessionary period combined with deflation. Money was goods. The automobile makers kept making cars after the 29 crash. Right. The United States government had to say, stop. You got lots full of cars. Don't make any more. Don't make. Let the market absorb. What do you think happened to the workers? Out the door. 1 out of 4 households was unemployed in the 30s. Now, we've got a lot of safeguards in place to make sure that doesn't happen, including FDIC insurance and unemployment insurance, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, a whole host of things. But those have to be paid for. So the U.S. government has to be sustainable. The U.S. economy has to be sustainable. U.S. industry has to be sustainable in order for all this to come back together and work like a clock again.
We got about 2 minutes left.
Okay.
There's so much more to talk about. What is your final conclusion?
We need to re-regulate. Now, these are my subjective views. They don't represent the views of any organization.
No, you.
We need to come back and re-regulate our businesses to give balance, that there's an economic interest so that we have our self-interests and incentive systems in place, but that there's also the common good protected. Look what happened. We deregulated airlines. We deregulated phone companies, electric companies. We had chaos in the marketplace. We have, to a large degree, deregulated or not properly regulated going forward the capital markets that became more globalized and more complex, much more complex.
Right.
And so we need to look back at banking and investment, money, anything. About 25% of our economy is about money. Mm-hmm. So we really, if our federal government and our state governments are looking to protect us, then they need to protect the money, and that means all of the mechanisms in the money market. So I think that citizens, people watching, investors, voters, or whatever you are, should be more aware of these things and demanding that their government and that their media tell them more and tell them more accurately, and that we have less shouting on some programs and more education.
And the companies have to be more accountable.
And the companies have to also be more open, transparent, and accountable. That may mean we have to change our incentive systems. But you and I will be okay.
We're out of time.
And our viewers will be okay.
We're out of time. You'll come back.
I will. I have faith in this country. I will be back.
Yeah, I do too. Anyway, we're out of time, and it's an important conversation, and it's a sober conversation.
Yes.
And we'll talk more about it. Listen, this man's a very bright guy, and he sees things the way they are and the way they should be. And I listen to him. And you should question people, question business, question your government. You should just question and make sure who's accountable, and you have to develop on your own trust for yourself and build it back again for everybody. Dr. Pass is saying, we got to go. Trust me, we got to go. Okay, like Hank Boerner, whatever you do, do it with passion. See you again next time.
Thank you.